Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm David Widmar, co-founder of Agricultural Economic Insights, joining you for the forecast question of the week, where we're going to spend a little bit of time unpacking the July WASDE report. Of course, we had the two Ag Forecast Network questions about the probability of the USDA increasing yield of estimates for corn and soybeans based on the July WASDE. Given all the dryness that we had seen in June, the likelihood of that seemed very, very small. Also diminishing is the likelihood of an above trend line crop. But when we wrote these questions, it was early on, so early in June, so that we didn't have much dryness to be contending with or navigating. And so this is one of those questions where, in hindsight, we have way more insights than we did at the beginning of the question. But we resolved those questions because the USDA lowered the corn yield estimates to 177.5 compared to 181.5 as a starting point, and it also kept the soybean yield unchanged. So let's dive into a little bit about the WASDE situation, how that played out on the balance sheets, but also spending a little bit of time understanding the USDA's estimates. And so how did they come to that conclusion about the corn yield estimate coming down in June? Well, here are the footnotes from this WASDE table that they put together, and highlighted in yellow, it says the yield projections is based on a weather adjusted trend estimated using the 1988 to 2022 time period. That's the Westcott-Jewison model that Jeff Young talks about and writes about all the time. So regular readers, that is not going to be a surprise to you. It's assuming normal planting progress, but lowered to reflect extreme dryness during June. And so keep this in mind. It was the World Outlook Board that made this adjustment based on historic relationships between the data that we know about planting progress back in May, but also the June precipitation that was observed. This was not based on surveying farmers. This wasn't based on the crop conditions. This wasn't based on qualitative measures of yield or stands or ear size or pollination or anything that happened to do in the fields. It was based on the historic relationship between weather and what we've seen. There's some other models that they use in that, but this gives you an idea of how they came to those conclusions. So what's the net impact on the balance sheets? In fact, it's a bit of an interesting situation because we haven't seen that big of a change from where we were a month ago, excuse me, especially given all the big adjustments. So the first piece here is the stock to use for corn in July. We're at 15.6%. Not much of a change from where we were a month ago. Not much of a change at all. And even at the beginning of May, we're at 15.3%. Now that is on the burdensome side of the spectrum when we consider the long run average is at 13.1%. We're at 10.2% for the 2022-23 marketing year. Of course, that's the grain that we're trying to export today. We're trying to grind and convert into ethanol and to feed the livestock. Crop we harvested last year, 9.2% or 10.2% stocks to use. And 2 years ago, we were at 9.2% stocks to use. So giving you a little bit of context of where we have been, where we are at. Now, when you look at the acreage change, 2 million acres up, ending stocks didn't change that much, but also in there is that USDA adjustment to yields. They pulled yields from 181.5 down to 171.5. So in here, when we look at this, we can see that the total supply has not changed a lot much. And in fact, the USDA didn't change any of these usage projections, which I initially anticipated them going to have to. But because we have this lower yield, that we'd have to see all these big adjustments here. And that leaves us with ending stocks and the farm level price estimate unchanged. For soybeans, a bit of a similar situation. We did see some tightening. We're down to 7% stocks to use compared to 7.9%. But when you think about these different categories that the USDA adjusted, if you just step here and look at the production numbers, we went from production of 4.5 billion bushels to 4.3 billion bushels. And now you can never just take this change in production and not make any adjustments for usage, because you would have said, oh, we're 210 million bushels less, but the USDA only said there's a net here of 50 fewer million bushels of ending stocks. What was the change? Well, we saw there was an increase in the beginning stocks. There was a small decrease in the projection for domestic crushings, and also a decrease in projected exports. And so that's how we saw this net out to a slightly tighter stock situation for soybeans. So in general, this is that time of the year where you got to stay on your toes. You think you have kind of one narrative nailed down, and it can change really quickly because there's all these other pieces. Just in the last few weeks, we've had the concerns from weather dryness go to more favorable weather. We've had the corn acreage, or the June acreage report, come out and estimate additional acres of corn, fewer acres of soybeans. We've had the ending stock situation, which had an impact, or the stock situation had an impact for the beginning stocks for soybeans for this upcoming marketing year. And we've also seen this yield revision downward for corn. Big changes here in the balance sheets, but not a lot of big change. So a lot of changes in the balance sheet, but the top line numbers or the bottom line numbers haven't changed all that much. Encourage you all to get in there and make your forecast for the August WASDE reports. We have questions of the probability of the WASDE yield ratcheting these potentially higher. This becomes a bit interesting to think about, how we've seen corn yield come down. How will that reflect once we start getting some farmer survey data in there and the NASS starts making its estimates? Also, here is the long-term question. We asked this starting back in May, and of course it goes all the way through November. What's the probability of the November 23 WASDE report estimating corn yield, national yield above 181.5 bushel per acre? A lot of background information in there. Here's my forecast. I lowered it just a little bit because of this July WASDE report. But it's always important to step back and say, when do conditions change? When did my thinking change? And how is this playing out? This is all we have for this update. Encourage you to make those forecasts for the August WASDE report. Check your scores on the July WASDE questions and keep track of your points for the yield forecast challenge. That's all I have for this week. In the meantime, stay curious.